This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. This Week in Virology, episode number 306, recorded on October 10th, 2014. Hey everybody, I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you are listening to TWiV, the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from southeastern Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody.
How's it going out there? You into fall yet?
Oh, definitely into fall. Lovely trees, and right now it's 61 degrees Fahrenheit. 56 on this app, and 13 degrees Celsius. Sunny. It was cold this morning. It was in the 30s.
Yeah, we warmed up here this week. It was in the 20s, I'll say, Celsius today. It's 17 Celsius, some clouds in the sky, and 41% humidity. Yeah, the leaves are falling. Also joining us from western Massachusetts, Alan Dove.
Good to be here.
How's it going out there?
Yeah, lovely weather. Same thing you've got. It's 17 C, 62 Fahrenheit, and clear, mostly clear skies, a couple of clouds here and there, but really, really nice autumn New England kind of day, and leaves are another week or so will probably have pretty good color.
We're ripping through October.
Yeah.
And I can't wait till next summer. Soon summer will be here.
Because we'll be done talking about Ebola?
I don't know. We might talk for many more months, although it may get to the point where new things aren't happening. It's just the same old. I don't know. You remember the swine flu outbreak. After a certain point, people stop talking because it's just going on.
Right. Issue fatigue.
I don't know if we'll finish this before the end of the year, though.
Wow.
I don't know.
Probably not. I hope you're right if you're saying we are. This episode is brought to you by the Department of Microbiology at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, composed of over 20 virology labs, all centralized in one building in the heart of New York City. The department is perfect for anybody interested in pursuing virus research, and they would like to recruit graduate students. Apply to their PhD program. The deadline is December 1st. Go to mssm.edu/MIC, and if you're a postdoc and you want to work there, just contact the faculty member that you're interested in. You can find a list of them on that website. And last time we talked about some of the people that I know. I just ran a few off the top of my head, and there are many more.
Yeah, Anna Fernandez-Sesma, Jean Lim, Nicole Bouvier, Matt Evans, of course, where my former student went to do her postdoc.
So Jean Lim is someone who was a TWiV fan. I forgot where she came from, but she let us know she was looking for a job, and then she had an interview, and then she ended up at Mount Sinai. I think she's a dengue person, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, check out the program. It's cool. Alan and I, not Alan, I vouch for it. Alan has a stapler from the program.
Yes, I have a stapler. It's a wonderful, wonderful stapler.
They have great staplers over there. And I don't have one anymore, do I? I'm looking around here. No, I don't have any Mount Sinai staplers. But check it out. Also, if you are interested in public outreach, communications, you like microbiology, you should think about applying to the American Society for Microbiology. They have a headquarters communications fellowship. It's a 6-month fellowship in Washington, D.C., and you can learn about how to communicate science. They're accepting applications through October 22nd, and you can go to bit.ly/communication fellow, all one word. And you should move on that because the deadline is coming up. 12 days, right? So if you want to learn, 6 months of fellowship experience.
That would be a great deal for somebody. If I were coming out of grad school now and wanted to go into science communication, that's I'd definitely
think
be looking
about doing that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then you would get to work with all the fine people in communications down there at ASM. And you might even encounter me because I'm chair of the communications committee there.
And you'd be in D.C., which is a great business to be in, a great city to be in for the the communication business.
Yeah, it is. Or lack thereof.
Or yes.
8,033 over 3,865. That is this week's official CDC WHO numbers on the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. 8,033 cases, 3,865 deaths. And last week, I'm looking for the number. Last week we had them here all the way down. Oh boy, I should have scrolled and had it ready, right? 7,157. So almost 1,000 more cases in the past week.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
now, of course, we always have to put an asterisk on these data. There are a lot of gaps.
Right.
Yeah, it's probably underreporting, right?
And we would expect the case number to rise just as the response ramps up, just because they're doing better reporting.
Yeah.
But also, we would expect more cases to arise because things are still chaos there.
Now, Kathy, you stuck a couple of links to CDC materials in here, and one of them I don't think we showed before. It's just a fact sheet on Ebola. The other one is called an infographic, and they have made a color version of it. Mm-hmm. So we linked it to it in one of our previous episodes. But that was a black and white version.
Ah, okay.
So this is we'll link to this. I was looking at the stats today. I was just curious. So our all-time most downloaded episode has always been what's that LA crime show again?
CSI?
CSI
Virology. This has always been the highest. I don't know why. But the first Ebola episode we did, it's Ebola Don't Panic. Mm-hmm. It's almost at 16,000 downloads.
Wow.
And that's about where CSI Virology has been for a long time. So that might be the all-time most downloaded episode. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
We got the Ebola bump.
And we've had a few others after that which aren't doing badly. My blog is lighting up with lots of posts. It's pretty good to see people looking for information.
Mm-hmm. It's nice that you put all your blog posts and all the TWiV episodes together as a single tab on your blog page. I can't remember where in the notes we have that, but
yeah, our notes are so long now that we can't find anything. Yes. That's why we're like stumbling here.
And we should let people know. We were talking about this before the show. We've gotten a lot of letters still, and we already had a lot of letters in the queue that are not about Ebola. And unfortunately, it's going to be a little while before we get to them. You know,
this is the first time we've had a real demand for information on a particular topic. I mean, the email has been far away more than anything else. So we figured we should address it until it subsides, because that's what you want to hear, right?
Yeah, and the amount of misinformation and general panic that's out there about this is even greater than in the very beginning days of the H1N1 pandemic, which was pretty significant.
So the page is virology.ws/Ebolavirus. I put together all the blog posts, which is not a lot that I've written, most of them in the past few weeks, and all the TWiVs. It actually goes back to number 13. Hey, this is cool. This is cool to go back. 13 was the top 10 virology stories of 2008, and number 5 was a new Ebola strain. Newly discovered Ebola virus, and that's what we now call Bundibugyo. And we talked about last week because someone said that the U.S. tried to patent it, and therefore they must have invented it.
Right.
Yes, so we will do Ebola as long as you want us to. I think if you want information about viruses, you should go to a virologist. Don't you guys think so?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there are plenty out there, and you can not just find us, but there are plenty of other virologists out there on social media that you can ask about this. And if you can't contact them, let us know, and we will hook you up. We're happy to do that. I have a follow-up from last time. I just was more curious about this idea of Ebola virus in insects, so I found a couple of papers. I was reading them on the train last Sunday. I took a trip to Washington, and that gives me 2.5 hours each way. to read without anyone interrupting me. So I found a paper in American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene called Lack of Virus Replication in Arthropods After Intrathoracic Inoculation of Ebola Restin. So they inoculated 3 mosquito species, a soft tick, and didn't see any replication in those animals. And then there was a second paper, which is entitled Experimental Inoculation of Plants and Animals with Ebola Virus. 24 species of plants and 19 species of vertebrates and invertebrates, including the cockroach, leafhopper, ant, spider, millipede, and, there you go, other things too. No replication. And finally, in another paper, which I forgot to link here, I'll put it in the show notes. This is a heroic effort. They went to an area of the Democratic Republic of the Congo where there had been an outbreak, and they had found the index case, and they thought this area was where that index case had probably acquired his infection. They harvested 34,985 arthropods from this area and looked in each of them and found no Ebola virus. Now, that's a tough one because I'll bet that 34,000 is like a 1,000th of what's out in a certain area, right? It's just
depending on how you sampled them, though, that's probably a pretty good.
If not from 1 square meter, right?
Yeah, exactly. You didn't just dig in the ground in one termite mound and pull out 34,000 of them.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you hung up a malaise trap and then maybe a CO2 trap and got some biting flies and that sort of thing, it's not a bad survey. I think I remember when that study, either when it was done or a subsequent discussion of it, and there was some criticism that this was just a very shotgunish approach. That no, you're not going to find anything that way, of course, because you're not going to. It's not really based on any theory. But I think the feeling was, well, we don't have any other leads, so why not?
So that's what we have. Also, none of the risk factors are being bitten by a bug. So when you do epidemiology and you have cases, you ask them, what did you do? Were you here? Were you there? Did this happen? That happened? And no risk factor is really having an insect bite. So
this is not an insect-borne disease.
No, it's not. It's not going to become one either.
No.
Right.
Just a few other things I collected during the week. One is from ProMed Mail. There is a chapter from a book, or a book, I'm not sure which, on Ebola. It's from Manson's Tropical Diseases. I guess it's a chapter from this medical textbook. Yeah. It's been put online, so you can get it. It's open access. And there are apparently 300 Ebola-related documents at this site, standard operating procedures, information, etc., on different hemorrhagic fevers as well as Ebola. So it's quite a nice chapter. It's from 2014. It's a new book.
Cool.
So check that out. Thanks to the Wellcome Trust who paid for this. I also, scrolling through ProMed Mail.
Right, because the book is published by Elsevier, who couldn't have done that on their own.
That's right. That's right. So, one thing, now that you've mentioned that, I know a lot of people would like to get into the original Ebola literature at the moment, right?
Sure.
And some publishers have opened up their Ebola.
Yes.
So ASM, I think, has opened up its Ebola literature. So has Science. It would be nice if everyone did.
Well, and after a certain amount of time, I thought that pretty much all the ASM stuff is open.
Yeah, ASM is open. Not everybody, as you know, though.
Right.
I found this interesting tidbit at ProMed Mail. It was a copy of the passenger screening form from the Ebola patient who went to Dallas and has since died when he was screened in the emergency room. So they asked him, for example, have you been stuck with a needle used on an Ebola patient? He said no. Have you had body fluids of an Ebola patient in your eyes, nose, or mouth? He checked no. Have you taken part in burial or funeral rites or touched the body of someone who has died in an area where there is Ebola? He checked no. Did you stay in a house or have contact with an Ebola patient? No. Have you taken care of an Ebola patient or come in contact with body fluids? No. And so, have you worked in a lab that processes body fluids of confirmed Ebola patients? No. So, I guess the point of this was that he was being a bit disingenuous or misleading.
What do we? I haven't followed that probably as closely as I should have. What was his suspected exposure?
All right, so the original article I read last week was that they brought a pregnant woman to the hospital. She was sick, and they turned her away because they had no room. He helped carry her to the car.
He helped carry her to the taxi, right?
Yeah, and then she died that evening.
Right. Right, so he had contact with an Ebola patient.
Yeah, I think he knew it was an Ebola patient. That's why they brought her. They suspected it, I suppose. All right, well, anyway, that patient unfortunately has died. And so we still don't understand, and we'll get into this a bit later, what happened in the hospital, why he was sent home after the first visit.
Right.
I don't know if we'll understand that. It seems to me that, I don't know, I grew up here at Columbia with an infectious disease physician. He was the chief of ID. His name was Harold New. And I used to hear him lecture to students. And this was 30 years ago, and he would say the most important thing you can do is get a travel history. And it seems to me that even in a very busy place, you should find out where the person's from. I mean, even if you don't get the information, ask them.
Right.
I don't think there's any excuse for not doing that. I don't understand it.
My father-in-law was an infectious disease doc, and he's fond of saying that the patient history is the most important and least reliable information that you have.
Yep. I knew him.
You have to get it.
I knew him. He was at Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
He used to teach. He used to teach. I remember him. Right. Yep, absolutely. What a small world, Alan.
Absolutely.
There is a cool I don't know if it's so cool. There's an interesting publication called Facts About Bushmeat and Ebola, published by the CDC. And I think this is really nice. What's bushmeat? You shouldn't bring it to the U.S. because it can be, it can have pathogens in it, and you could get Ebola from it. So it says, generally, Ebola is not spread by food. However, in Africa, human infections have been associated with hunting, butchering, and processing meat from infected animals. So it's a poster you could put up on the wall.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just put it in my home.
I suspect eating bushmeat is not an issue in your home.
But it is an issue in your city.
Yeah, people do bring bushmeat into New York. You shouldn't do that.
So.
Yeah.
As everyone probably knows also, there has been... there's a couple of things let's bring up here. First of all, as you know, Alan and I last week disagreed on whether we should ban incoming flights from West Africa.
Yep.
And Robert Harriman, who runs Outbreak News Today, asked me for a statement. And he said, anybody else who would like to make a statement? And I said, yeah, I bet Alan Dove would like to make a statement. Yep. And so he polled us, and he also polled... he got quotes from Fauci and Frieden, which are in the news. Then he's got the dean of the School of Health at Mercyhurst University, who referred me to an opinion piece in the Post, I guess, that he got. He said, my stance is that we should ban travel. And then science journalist Alan Dove. Tara Smith at Kent State said we shouldn't ban travel. And there's also a poll conducted by NBC News of regular old Americans out there, and most of them do want to ban flights. Right. Now, I understand the reasons not to ban flights, but I'm not looking at it from an economic or sociological or political viewpoint. I'm looking at it strictly from a virological viewpoint. I'm just afraid that this virus is going to get out, and we should try and stop it. I understand we don't want to wreck the country and so forth, and it's hard to do, but it just frightens me, the idea of it getting into other countries and spreading and having 10 or 12 outbreaks at the same time.
Well, I agree. We should absolutely do everything we can to stop this. But I think we should take measures that actually have a chance of working and not making the problem worse. And that's where I object to the idea of a flight ban, because in theory, if it was actually possible to implement it the way people imagine it being implemented, I still might not be convinced, but at least you could make the argument. But in reality, the way this would play out, I mean, the two immediate consequences of it are, first of all, you would shut off all travel going into those countries, because nobody's going to send flight crews or other people into a country they can't get them back out of. And secondly, the people in those countries would immediately panic and flee for the borders.
Are you sure?
Because it would,
Are you sure
I am
about
certain
that?
of it.
I don't know how you can say that.
It would be a loud message from the rest of the world that you're on your own.
No, we would still send in healthcare people.
How?
The Army would go in. Why not? You could just say flights that are carrying healthcare personnel can go in, but not citizens coming out.
And healthcare personnel can come out?
Sure, they can, because they're wearing the proper protection.
Even though healthcare personnel are actually the highest risk group for this virus?
Yes, of course, because they're also the highest protected.
That makes no sense.
Now they're the highest protected as well, right?
In theory, yes, but who got infected in Spain?
Yeah.
But she's one out of many. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
That's an issue.
I think it wouldn't work because you can't keep people from leaving the country by a lot of other ways besides just flights. Even if you banned flights to Europe and to everywhere, I think it would just not work. To me, it's almost akin to saying, can you ensure that all the smallpox stocks, would go away, or once polio was eradicated, could we get rid of all the polio? If we try to stop this virus from leaving Western Africa, I just don't think we can do it.
And yeah, if you're in Liberia and you want to go to New York and the direct flights have been canceled, well, okay, take local transportation of some kind to go to another country in Africa and then fly to New York. Problem solved. And now, by encouraging people to do that, which a flight ban absolutely would encourage them to, you have completely lost track of the ability to monitor who came from where. Anybody coming from anywhere could have originated in Liberia, Sierra Leone, or Guinea, and these are the three countries we're talking about.
Well, I hope you guys are right.
I just think the way it would play out, I think, it would make the problem a whole lot worse.
Well, you could say anybody arriving in the U.S. or any country from these countries goes back. You just cannot go. I mean, if you try and
so you just have to hide that in your travel history.
You can do that?
Sure.
I can't ever hide anything. I don't know why they could, but
well, you're not really trying.
Yeah.
You don't have to
see, that's what I'm saying. These are all non-virological issues that I'm not considering. I just would like to stop this. As far as I can see, it's out of control. It's not being stopped anytime soon, and it's going to get out, no question. Now, I agree that flu used to travel before airplanes, for sure, and so it's tough. But it seems to me if you don't make an effort, it's going to be really hard to stop. Once it's in 10 countries, it's going to be really hard. But they are doing temperature scanning in 5 U.S. airports, right?
Right.
Including the ones here in New York, and I don't know what others. Does anyone know offhand?
Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, New York, JFK and Newark, and I can't remember the fifth one.
So how's this going to work? If you're coming from these 3 countries, they'll check your temperature, right?
Check your temperature.
But if you're coming from somewhere else, they will not, correct?
Right.
So if they cover up, as Alan is saying, they're going to
but there's
fall
not,
through.
if you're just checking the temperature, there's not as much motivation to cover up. If you're banning flights, then people who want to get out of those countries are going to have to figure out alternate routes, and you won't be able to track them.
But let's say someone's got a temperature and they're freaking out. They want to get into a U.S. hospital, so they might get on a plane and come here.
Sure.
And they might even try and cover up where they're coming from so that they're not caught at the airport. But actually, if they are caught at the airport, they'll be whisked to a hospital and
they'll
taken
go to
care
a
of.
U.S. hospital, exactly. Yeah. And I don't think the temperature screening is. My thing with the flight bans is I don't think there's any way to stop this from traveling to some extent. So the efforts that we make to prevent it from coming into other countries should be ones that at least won't do any harm. I think a flight ban would do enormous harm. I think the temperature screening, it's inconvenient and probably not going to work like everything else the TSA does, but it is at least a measure that we can take that will hopefully mitigate some of the public calls for radical and probably counterproductive things like flight bans.
So what are they doing at the airports in Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, do we know?
Well, we know they're giving people these questionnaires that they can lie on.
And they measure their temperature.
Are they doing temperature?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And that, by the way, the Dallas patient did not arrive with a fever. So
That's right. Yeah.
if he
didn't depart with a fever either.
And he didn't depart with a fever, so the fever screening would not have picked that up. And yeah, people can lie on a form. So yes, this system is not perfect, but there is no perfect system that we're going to be able to implement. So I think what we're doing now is about the maximum reasonable measure we can take, unfortunately.
So there's this interesting issue of, the incubation period is from 2 to 21 days, right, guys?
Yes.
I didn't have to look it up.
Nope.
Yeah.
And in that time, up to 2 days, before you display symptoms, so that's the incubation period is a time up until which you display symptoms. In that time, apparently, you're not infectious with Ebola.
Right.
So that's been bandied about everywhere. And in fact, Tom Frieden said this patient on the Dallas guy, he flew in asymptomatic, so there's zero chance he could have infected everyone else. So I wondered, what's the evidence for that? And I really couldn't find any, so I emailed Elke Mühlberger up at BU, who works on Ebola. And she said it's mainly epidemiological. I have a quote from her somewhere in here. Let's see if I can find it. Find ELKE. Here we go. This is based on the observations of epidemiologists and healthcare takers during previous outbreaks. Only people got infected who had close contact to severely ill patients. During the previous outbreaks, it was relatively easy to trace back the chain of infection, and people who had contact to patients before they got ill did not become infected. So that's what it's based on. It's not experimental. So there's a lot of wiggle room there.
There's some, but it's still have been quite a few Ebola epidemics and outbreaks before this one.
There have been, but not a lot of cases. So this is the biggest one.
Yeah.
As you point out on your blog post, that's not true for every virus. There are some viruses that can be spread before a person has symptoms.
That's right. It's an important thing to recognize that it's not a given for all viruses, right? Polio and noroviruses are shed before you have symptoms.
Yep.
All right, we're back. Now we are into the follow-ups of others. Kathy, you want to start, please?
Am I starting with Lance?
Yeah.
Lance writes, I'm still a week behind on TWiV at the moment, but I heard Dixon suggest that someone from the UK who is interested in helping should contact the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. In fact, the UK Register of Volunteers is being held at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine and can be accessed here. So not the London one, but the Liverpool one. And he gives a link to that. This is also accessible through the UK International Emergency Medical Register here. And he gives a link to that. Note that there is also a specific request for non-healthcare workers, people with skills in logistics, sanitation, management, communications, etc. Keep up the good work, Lance.
Cool.
All right, there you go. Well, if our listener is still listening.
And Lance would know. He's at the University of Liverpool.
Right.
Lance works for Tom Solomon, who his TWiV will be up in a couple of weeks. I had posted a little excerpt of my talk with him over a month ago because we were talking about Ebola. And Lance is the guy who hooked us up. He said, you should do a TWiV with my boss.
Cool.
All right, Alan, can you take the next one?
Sure. Jackie writes, Dear Vincent and the TWiV team, I should start by thanking you so much for all that you do to make TWiV possible. The world is a better place for having your podcast in it, and I have been a long-time fan. I was really pleased to hear that you had Jeff Shaman on to talk about the epidemiological dimensions of the outbreak. This was a great episode. I'm a medical anthropologist at the American Museum of Natural History, although I concentrated on virology in my undergraduate and postbac, and originally planned to become a virologist focusing on viral hemorrhagic fevers, particularly Ebola, a disease I became interested in while living in East Africa in the mid-2000s. However, my time there also underscored that viral outbreaks like this are indeed sociological problems as much as they are microbial and epidemiological, and I transitioned into medical anthropology. I was struck by the quote from an episode several weeks ago when either you or Alan indicated that for a viral hemorrhagic fever epidemic to get to the point that this many people are becoming infected, we have to acknowledge that there are social dimensions rather than some remarkable pathogenicity that makes this possible. This is a sociological problem, quote. I have this quote on my wall now with a TWiV hashtag next to it. I'm writing to let you know about a webinar organized by the American Anthropological Association that I'm participating in tomorrow afternoon about the role of anthropology in the current Ebola epidemic. The information on the webinar can be found here. Now, is this tomorrow?
No, this is weeks ago.
This is weeks ago.
This was on October 2nd, actually. Not that long, right?
Okay. Is it? Can people watch the...
Yeah, there's a recording there.
So you can watch the recording.
Yeah.
Continuing the letter, it's live streaming at 1 p.m. People can post their questions to the feed and on Twitter, but it'll be archived on YouTube after this. One of the questions the panelists are discussing ahead of tomorrow are the ethical implications of Liberia as a quote-unquote living lab for virologists and epidemiologists if Ebola does indeed become, or is perceived as becoming, endemic in the region. I would love to hear your perspective on this. I thought you or your listeners might find this web event interesting. I would also be keen to talk to you more about how social, biological, and medical scientists can better work together on viral epidemics in terms of coordinating more accurate media coverage, working to assist affected communities with more comprehensive and contextually appropriate responses, and advocating greater and more multidisciplinary research funding from NSF and other funding bodies. My current work is a media tone analysis of how proximity of perceived threat translates into coverage that veers toward alarmist or comforting othering media messages. I'm interested in making this work more accessible to virologists, who I still consider my people too, because much of this work looks at how the lab work is translated to the public and impacts political capital downstream, which I think is the other half of the sociological cycle you identified in an earlier episode. There's a poor grasp across all sectors of the role of structural violence and colonial and war histories in these places, and this understanding is crucial for understanding why there's much resistance to public health interventions from the West. The findings that are generated from the lab and collected in the field are being disseminated into media that are context poor when it comes to West Africans and their lives both before and during this epidemic. A deeper understanding of the in situ can only help folks in the lab, and a demystification of the lab can only help scientists in their efforts. That sounds like a cool project.
Yep, it does.
I'm also noting a strong de-emphasis on the hemorrhagic aspect of how Ebola is discussed in public spheres with this outbreak, in contrast to the wave of outbreaks in the mid-1990s or the mid-2000s, and I'm beginning to assess how and why this is happening. I'd noticed that too. My hypothesis is this outbreak has been perceived as having pandemic potential in a way that other viral hemorrhagic fever outbreaks have not had beyond worst-case scenario speculation. And so the more extreme or extraordinary symptoms are being de-emphasized to reduce the potential for generating a grassroots panic, which would be epidemiologically detrimental. It's hard to assess all this in the midst of an outbreak, of course, but I'm setting the methods in place to study these phenomena in the coming months. Vincent, I know you're just over at Columbia. I'm not sure if you already know anyone over here at AMNH, but if you haven't gotten the behind-the-scenes tour here, I'd be thrilled to welcome you here sometime, or head up your way if you had some time to talk about this further. Thanks for all you do to make virology more accessible to the public. And Jackie is at the American Museum of Natural History, as she said.
Oh, we should have Jackie on the show. This is cool stuff that we don't touch, and it would be neat to hear her perspective.
Yeah, this would be really neat.
Definitely.
This take on Liberia as a living lab. Well, wherever disease is, you study it so that you can learn to prevent future outbreaks, right? So I don't think that's negative in any way. Do you guys?
No, and in fact, people have said or complained that we don't know that much about this virus. Well, it's because we haven't had as much opportunity as we have had to study it compared to other viruses. Yep. This gives us that opportunity.
Yeah, sample sizes for Ebola studies have gotten much, much, much larger in the past few months, sadly.
I mean, I hate to say it, but if it does become endemic somewhere, I don't know how that would happen because it's so lethal that it's very hard to become. That would have to modify.
Yeah.
Then you could do vaccine trials.
Right.
Because you should have regular outbreaks and so forth. Not that I'm wishing that on anyone, but I'm just saying that's one thing. Anyway, Jackie, get in touch. We'll have you on here on TWiV, and of course, I'd love to come down and look behind the scenes down there.
Yeah.
Or if we could do a TWiV from there.
Well, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Alan could get down here for that.
I could probably get down there for that.
Yeah. I'd figure out a way.
Yeah, well, then we'd have to have camera people too, and
yes.
Get
pictures of the dinosaurs,
the
and the gems, and
Okay. All right, the next one is from Daniel, writes, Dear Drs. Racaniello, de Pommier, Dove, Spindler, after listening to a number of those parasitism podcasts, I thought I might try introducing a bit of TWiV, a netcast about viruses, into my commute. I'm a clinician and researcher, splitting my time between clinical care of patients with infectious diseases and medical research. I jumped right into your podcasts that discussed Ebola, and I found them very edutaining. Last fall, I delivered a lecture on chikungunya and one on Ebola to an audience of clinicians, and we all discussed this week how my lectures on topics considered esoteric for clinicians here in the States have now become relevant. As I may head to West Africa, likely Sierra Leone, next month for a period of time to assist with the current outbreak, I've been listening to your recent discussions more than just academic interest. You're all doing an excellent job, and I hope just to make a comment in this email. Listening to the beginning of the Borna podcast, I had a bit of an emotional reaction to your discussion about how airborne is defined in the literature. Now, perhaps it was just the caffeine from my double latte hitting the bloodstream, but in case it was not, I did want to comment. When one refers to the literature, in quotes, I usually need to ask myself who the speaker is and to what literature they are referring. If it be my wife, this might be to those things written by Jane Austen and the like. For my kids, it might be Percy Jackson or Harry Potter. Being one trying to converse in the parlance of clinicians and basic scientists, I find that the literature of the clinician and the literature of the researcher may use the same term differently. As a routine part of the infection control responsibility of an infectious disease physician, I am asked to write or make recommendations regarding the isolation orders for patient care. Here I will put in a link to the CDC 2007 guideline for isolation precautions preventing transmission of infectious agents in healthcare settings. I believe this needs to be updated as this was composed in 2007 and is outdated in certain minor areas, but I do keep this as a shortcut on my smartphone. When admitting a patient or rooming them in the clinic for evaluation and care, we classify potentially infectious patients as capable of transmitting through contact, droplets, or airborne. Some infectious agents may require isolation covering multiple possible types of transmission. When dealing with a potentially infectious patient, we use the term airborne to refer to transmission that requires a patient to be placed in a negative pressure room, and staff need wear respirators in this environment for which we undergo yearly fit testing. And airborne precautions are used routinely for TB, tuberculosis cases. We see the disseminated zoster cases and the measles cases that are now back in circulation. Droplet precautions are used for many respiratory pathogens, as a good cough or a sneeze might propel infectious material up to 6 feet before the effects of gravity drive them to the ground. For such situations, when we perform a procedure such as bronchoscopy, where we might generate an aerosol, we introduce airborne precautions. Contact is rather straightforward. In general, I initially stand a good 6 feet from my patients until I have a better sense of the potential pathogen and request that they be placed in a negative pressure room and arrive in my N95 respirator if the story is more concerning. Remember that we are simple clinicians and happy discussing particle size in terms of qualitative terms mostly, but get uncomfortable when people start talking about microns, much as the Starbucks barista might if you ordered your coffee drink and requested your beverage size in milliliters rather than tall, grande, or venti. We, like patients, want to know if someone has to touch us, contact, cough on us, droplet, or can we catch something floating around the room 30 minutes after the patient headed off to get some expensive test done airborne. I do think it's reasonable to recognize and discuss the term airborne as it is used by clinicians and defined by the CDC, while recognizing that airborne might be used differently by those publishing in the basic science literature and even by concerned non-clinicians and non-scientists. In my discussions with concerned patients, I find they are not actually really asking about airborne transmission as defined by scientists or clinicians. What patients are asking me usually is whether Ebola can spread like influenza through respiratory droplets. Not the right term.
Nope.
It's not a droplet. It can spread through a droplet, but we're talking about airborne aerosols. All right, I go on. They want to know if they can catch Ebola in the subway, in the ER, or from a coworker coughing across the lab at lunch. Maybe. Patients are asking me if they can get Ebola from a hearty sneeze. Maybe. Or whether they actually need to touch an infected person. For sure.
Sure.
They want to know, do they have to touch a sick person, contact, get coughed on, droplet, or can they catch something floating around the room when they are more than 6 feet away, airborne? No, it's aerosol, right? It's
Right.
airborne aerosols
it's-
or droplets. Droplets is considered contact, really,
Right.
a form of contact. But he's a simple clinician, as he has said, right? Unfortunately, cough is a clinical feature reported with Ebola. He cites that. Although the cough is described as dry, and it would seem that there is no evidence to suggest that one can catch Ebola as easily as influenza, and near zero probability of that becoming the case. Continue with the good work. So Daniel is right here on the floor. I saw him just as I closed the door to record this episode. He is a physician scientist. He's doing research in Steve Goff's lab, and he's a doc out on Long Island. I appreciate the need to be simple for sure, but airborne aerosols, like if you're in the same room 10 feet away, you can catch influenza, measles, etc. Droplets are bigger, right? And if someone with Ebola coughs or sneezes right in your face, you could acquire it by that.
I would count that as an exposure if somebody with Ebola sneezed in my face. Yes.
And I would say that, we're going to do this later, but, if someone is shedding a good amount of Ebola in their secretions and they happen to be walking around and they get it on the subway pole, if you come in shortly afterwards and touch it, you could get it. You could. You could, if you touched it and then you touched your mucous membranes, you could in theory.
It is theoretically
Formally possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's not likely, and I don't know any risk factors of that.
Yeah, it would have to still be wet, and you'd have to touch it, and before it dried on your hand or you wiped it on your pants, you'd have to touch your mucous membranes. So it'd have to be a pretty gross situation.
Yeah, but it's theoretically possible.
But it is theoretically possible.
It's not
yes,
something that's going to happen all the time.
I wouldn't worry about it. If somebody with Ebola, even symptomatic, rode the subway, I don't think you would have to screen everybody who rode the subway that day.
No, it's all about the amount of virus that's being shed, right? So
Yes.
in the most serious parts of Ebola disease, when you're hospitalized and you're hemorrhaging and shedding fluids, there you're shedding a lot of virus. There it would be a problem. If they could get you into the subway, you could transmit it. But I think early on you're not shedding as much virus, so it's probably.
And when I ride the subway, I tend not to sit next to people who are bleeding through all their orifices and
just not really. It's not sensitive of you at all, Alan. Kathy, you're next.
Darren writes, lasers have been used to treat virus without damaging blood. Here, using a 776 nanometer pulsed laser. Here, using a 425 nanometer pulsed laser. Ebola is usually 974 nanometers to 1,086 nanometers long and 80 nanometers wide, making its resonant frequency similar to its length if it behaves in the same way as an antenna would. He gives a couple more links. It seems to me you can get the fluence of 970 nanometer light high enough to kill Ebola without killing cells. Red 700 nanometer and near infrared 700 to 1200 nanometer penetrates well through blood, and you can see red through your finger, for example. Gives another link. The resonance effect should make Ebola both more receptive to receiving energy at 980 nanometers or 1064 nanometers. Both these frequencies are commercial laser frequencies available in laser pointers for as low as $10 on eBay for 980 nanometers. It appears that the common 5 milliwatt milliwatt? Yeah, milliwatt laser pointer with the 2 to 3 millimeters squared spot is providing 0.167 watts per centimeter squared. I understand that herpes has been killed via laser at 4 joules per centimeter, so a common laser pointer could likely kill Ebola at a surface spot if applied for 30 to 40 seconds. Wouldn't the introduction of non-functional Ebola allow the body to make antibodies? So that's kind of a different topic. Seems to me a full body scanner could be made that would, quote, cure Ebola to a depth of 2 centimeters. Thanks for your time, Darren.
What about the rest of the centimeters?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty deep in your liver and other places.
I guess the idea would be to scan over a period of minutes until the blood flow through that top 2 centimeters has decontaminated a lot of your blood. But this is an interesting idea. This inactivating viruses with frickin' lasers. But I certainly wouldn't go buying a laser pointer and aiming it at myself to try and cure Ebola, but and if you do that, don't point it in your eyes.
Now I can see if the next time you see somebody on the subway shining a laser pointer on the pole,
you'll know they're twiveless.
You know why? They want to sterilize it before they touch it.
Right.
Yeah, it's clear that you can inactivate viruses with lasers, but I think in a body it's hard because, as Kathy said, the viruses are permeating all your solid organs as well as other places, and they're not going to come out.
The depth of penetration of laser light into tissue would be a major problem.
Right. But to his question, would the introduction of non-functional Ebola allow the body to make antibodies? That's the basis of inactivated virus vaccines.
Sure.
Right.
Whether
we don't know if those antibodies would be protective, but that's certainly one strategy.
Right.
All right. Alan, you're next.
Fox writes, "Hi TWiV, I'm a new listener over here in Corvallis, Oregon, where it is strangely 26°C and 39% humidity. Normally at this point in the season it would be much cooler and much wetter. I started listening after I heard an interview with Vincent and Dixon on Omega Tau. I'm a data scientist working for the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station on the Oregon State campus on the analysis of long-term climate data. I was so pleased to hear Jeff Shaman talking last week on the Ebola outbreak. Having taken most of my PhD coursework in geostatistics here, it was wonderful to see the robust techniques of geostatistics, which have their origin story in epidemiology with the John Snow cholera outbreak in the 1850s, ironically, applied to the field. Also, go Beavers, our Oregon State mascot." I don't have a particularly thoughtful comment to contribute, apart from that I was really taken aback by the listener email last week regarding the need for a scientist to look something up. I've been working on literally the same 10 square kilometer area for the past 5 years, and even now I still have to look up the geographic coordinates of study locations or measurement numbers of certain instruments. But I'd certainly rather do that than say, oh, well, I guess we're like at about 45 north or something like that. I mean, a few degrees this way or that. Who really cares? As a data scientist, I have the utmost respect for PIs and principal investigators and scientists who would rather go out of their way to look up the right information, as you all very respectively do, and to tell the truth, as you also do, rather than to try to act in a dramatic way or to coddle a pet theory, which you all don't. Oh, we coddle a few pet theories, but recent listener, yeah. Keep up the great and thoughtful work. I've still got about 280 TWiVs to catch up on, but thankfully our rainy season is coming up soon, so there will be plenty of time. P.S. Relative humidity is roughly the amount of moisture in the air relative to the maximum amount that could be stored at a given temperature of the air. This is an exponential relationship starting at the origin, i.e. more water can be held in the air at higher temperatures. So if you say the relative humidity is 40% at 25°C, you're saying of the X units of choice water that could be stored in the air per unit volume at 25°C, only 40% are currently there. When you cross that threshold of maximum storage, condensation, rain, snow, etc. The easiest way to explain this is in the context of two derived measurements, dew point and vapor pressure deficit. If you're still curious, you can look up Clausius-Clapeyron curve. It's a really great way to understand the relationship between temperature, relative humidity, vapor pressure, and dew point. And yes, I would still look it up when I'm looking at data from any of these measurements.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think Rich Condit would love this.
He
He's always all about the dew point thing. So he can check out that curve and enlighten us.
I had meant to answer our email back from Daniel. Talked about the literature. On TWiV, we try and cite the scientific literature. That's where we get our conclusions from. It's not anecdotal. That was originally the whole point of TWiV, was to present to you the literature. So the clinical and research literature, there is certainly different segments, but sometimes they overlap. You know, we do papers on clinical trials of viruses that are designed in certain ways and so forth. I think we more or less speak the same language. So, you know, that's why we use microns to define what constitutes an aerosol, because you have to be precise when you're talking about this kind of research. But anyway, I just want to say for you and other people, we don't just say things and pull them out of the air, right? We try and have a basis. I mean, whenever I see something, I try and look it up and find where it was referenced, which of course doesn't happen in the press, and it would take too much time and so forth. But if you like that, you know where to come.
Yep.
Right.
All right, Jesse and Carmen write, "Dear Grandmasters of the TWiV," and I love that appellation.
That's good.
Even though I don't play chess. Isn't that great? I've never heard that one before.
Grandmasters of the TWiV.
First, let us say we love your show, and it provides us expats working in Europe hours of nerdy entertainment in in English, expats, I guess. So we have a question. In a couple of the Ebola segments on your podcast, 302, about 39 minutes in, you mentioned that there's been no evidence of replicating virus found in seminal vaginal fluid after clearance of virus from the blood, and no evidence for sexual transmission. We've been looking into this question and have even submitted a grant to work on it, unsuccessfully, as it's true that the data are extremely sparse. However, we are curious as to your interpretation of those data that do exist. Have we mistaken in reading the evidence from, for example, Rodriguez et al., 99, Bausch et al., 2007, that there is, in fact, a small amount of evidence for replicating virus in seminal fluid after recovery from the acute phase? We have attached the papers we cite. As we are infectious disease biologists, but not virologists per se, we do not want to be misinterpreting these kinds of results. Also, maybe you could offer us your advice on what would be needed to conclusively show sexual transmission, both in an ideal setting versus under the current social limitations, which are not conducive to the ideal set of Koch's postulates. All right. Our specific questions are below. 1. How could a non-replicating virus manage to avoid being degraded in mucosal tissue or fluids that are, to our understanding, constantly being replaced, expelled for many months? We can take these one at a time. So the observation is that there is detection of Ebola virus in seminal fluid, and it's both PCR and virus, although the numbers are very low, as we'll see in a bit. But yes, these fluids are being replenished, but then you have to understand when a disease is over, there's still virus around, right? And it may take a while for that to be cleared. It's circulating through various tissues and may get lodged and so forth. So the tissues that provide seminal fluid are currently being replenished by whatever virus is circulating. So even though it's cleared out, more will come in. And that virus, since it's not replicating, is probably being degraded. So if you find RNA by PCR, it doesn't mean there's infectious virus present there. And if you only find one, in X number of patients, it may mean that at that time, as you get further and further away from the symptoms, it may be less likely, and you have to define some window after which you're sure that there's no more virus present there. Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Given the comparatively strong evidence for sexual transmission of Marburg and Lassa, two closely related virus, what might be different about Ebolavirus that would prevent it from being transmitted in this manner? They're different viruses, right? Who knows? It could be anything.
I went in to try and figure out where they were getting this information about Marburg being sexually transmitted. I found one case report in the literature for Marburg from 1968. It was in German, has an English summary, and a person who was a man had intercourse with his wife, and the man had suffered from the Marburg infection, and this was 2 months after he'd been dismissed from the hospital. His wife developed symptoms and signs of the disease, and they later, so they tested his sperm, and they found antigen in the sperm. They were able to transmit the virus to guinea pig and demonstrate virus antigen in the sperm, and immunofluorescence and phase contrast microscopy showed the virus. So it goes back to 1968. So this is one case report for Marburg, which is a related filovirus. I'm hard-pressed to find any other studies that indicate that there is extensive sexual transmission for Marburg. It's, again, formally possible for Ebola for the same reasons, and that's why there are the recommendations to either abstain or use a condom to protect after you're recovering from Ebola virus infection.
Yeah, but as you point out, it certainly is not as pervasively transmitted as HIV, for example, right?
Right.
So it's just not the same. But what was I going to say? Ebola and Marburg are in the same family, filoviruses, but there are many picornaviruses that are transmitted very differently. So I don't know what features are important, and I'm not sure we would ever be able to sort that out. But if it's even the two different strains of Ebola, I would say could in theory transmit differently because of minor differences.
Right.
3. Rodriguez et al. State that one sample of Ebola virus positive semen collected 82 days after onset of symptoms yielded an Ebola virus isolate on Vero cells. Bausch et al. Also isolate virus from Vero cells 40 days post-onset. Is this not a valid demonstration of infectivity? And if not, why? Actually, we just heard Kathy Spindler mention this paper in your latest cast. You sounded convinced. Is this the case? If so, why was the same 99 evidence dismissed? All right, so we've covered this in a couple of podcasts. I think initially we overlooked the recovery of infectious virus because it's only one in each paper.
And initially, the emphasis, I think, in the papers was on the PCR positive aspect, which, as we pointed out, is problematic. Yes, this indicates recovery of infectious virus from the semen 82 days post onset, or 40 days
in one study, and 82 days in the other.
82 in the other.
But it's one, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
And there are some authors in common on both papers, so it's not totally convincing.
And it is only. We are talking about single case reports here. On the other hand, this is Ebola. We don't, until very recently, we didn't have a whole lot of cases to study. And I don't think that we've said that this is not a route of infection, right?
No, I think we've agreed that it's a route. I mean, people were bothering me because I said no one would have sex after Ebola, and I realized that's not right. Okay, sorry.
If you wait long enough.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not a sociologist, obviously. I'm not even a human being. But what I want to say here, I would like to know if that isolate was the same as the original isolate that infected the person, because when you have just one in a study, I hate to mention the C word, but it could be contamination. I don't know kind of labs, whether there was Ebola there. You would hope in a BSL-4, it's not going to be the case. But one isn't convincing to me. All right, what do you need? You would need to have more examples of this happening, which I know is not great. If maybe you could have an animal model where it's transmitted sexually, or you find more evidence for virus in semen. These non-human primate infections. I don't know if anyone's looked there.
Right.
And number 4, in Leroy et al. 2000, they used RT-PCR with primers to amplify the positive sense sequence, i.e. the stage only present during replication, to identify infectious virus. They identified several asymptomatic patients with transient positive detection before seroconversion. Would this be an adequate method in your opinion? If so, why do you think others have not used this method since it was described? Thank you very much from our sunny perch here in Montpellier, France. Listen, I've been trying for 2 years to do negative strand specific PCR. In my case, my virus is positive stranded, so we want to amplify negative strands to prove that replication is occurring. It is really hard because you're using a plus and a minus strand primer, so it's really hard to make it strand specific.
Yeah.
As soon as you have one round of amplification, you got both strands there. So I'm not sure. That's why not everyone uses it, because it's really, really hard, and I'm not sure that they actually could do it in this paper. It's not clear to me that all the controls were present. So I'm telling you, we're still. I got a student who's about to burn out on it. He's having a hard time. Anything else here?
Yeah, so this is a route that could happen. There's some evidence that it's, might be happening or might have happened, and we don't know. The evidence is really, really sparse on this, and people have looked, but the evidence that people have found when they looked has been pretty unconvincing.
So our recommendation is, if you get Ebola and you recover, wear a condom afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's it.
Back on the idea of asymptomatic patients, I can't remember now where I read it or whether we talked about it on TWiV, but in addition to this Leroy et al. Paper from 2000, I remember hearing or seeing that there are seropositive people in Africa that have no evidence or recollection of having had Ebola.
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. In fact, over 2 years ago, I wrote a blog post about that. There are 2 papers from serosurveys in Gabon where they find 15% of the people are seropositive in an Ebola assay for antibodies. We asked Jens about that. I don't know, you guys were here for the Jens episode, right?
Right.
And he kind of dismissed it. He said, I don't know if it's cross-reactive or not.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty good evidence that there's subclinical infections. Why not? Right. I think after this episode in Western Africa, we could go in and do serosurveys and see, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now, as Jens pointed out, there's always the problem with a serosurvey. You don't know exactly what it's measuring. And there could be other, Ebola-like antigen similarities of other viruses that circulate in that area, which wouldn't even necessarily be filoviruses.
Mm-hmm.
Anything could evolve an antigen that looks similar enough to that to make you test positive for Ebola on an antigen test. But yeah, it's kind of the evidence available on that really does kind of suggest there might be subclinical infections going on out there.
All right, Kathy.
Anyway, thanks to Jesse and Carmen, and good luck with your grant proposals.
Yes, excellent thinking and questions.
Kathy, you're next.
Robin writes, when someone shovels aside the male bovine fecal material, and then she gives a link to a blog called Racaniello Report, which I looked at yesterday. It's a long blog with a lot of things that we could pick out to debunk.
So I mean, we think most of these points are absurd, right?
Yes.
And I think the main point is that the writer claims we have only 23 beds that can handle Ebola in the U.S., right. And they're saying we're going to get many more than that. So I don't think that's true that we only have 23 beds. Is that correct?
Of course not.
I mean, we can isolate people anywhere,
right,
and so forth. Yep. So this is just, as Robin says, it's male bovine fecal material. I will do a do not link on that one, right?
Right.
Okay. Since that was so short, would you like to take Kurt's?
Sure. Kurt writes, hello, TWiV doctors. I hope this letter finds you all in good spirits.
Oh, yeah. We're just great, right?
Yes. I'll start with something I've been meaning to get off my chest since the Ebola arc started. How do you know it won't go airborne or worse, telepathic? How can you know that it won't hitch a ride on a mosquito and establish itself in America's Bigfoot population? Can you show me some proof Ebola isn't a conspiracy by Mercola to push colloidal silver? How dare you speak with some confidence, albeit appropriately cautious when you're asked to prove a negative? Second, a listener wanted to know, rhetorically I recognize, why the ambulance and crew were taken out of service for Ebola virus exposure in Dallas when no such measure would be employed for, say, carbapenem-resistant enterococci pneumonia or hepatitis C. I feel that since I work in this field, I may be able to help clarify the rationale. I would propose multiple reasons working in concert, first and foremost being fear, since this is, after all, a BSL-4 pathogen that's known to the public for turning people into soup. Secondly, ambulance designs have to fulfill multiple roles beyond providing healthcare, such as providing safe transport and packing away a trauma room's worth of equipment into the back of a van. Unfortunately, this can lead to many tight, poorly accessible surfaces that can ultimately prove much more difficult to clean effectively than your typical hospital room, especially if your patient is busily unleashing 4 liters of Ebola in the form of diarrhea. Third, providers who are with the patient during transport are in much closer quarters with poorer air circulation, sometimes for longer periods of time than your typical hospital personnel, making the likelihood of inspiration of sneeze droplets or accidental smearing of contaminated sweat on one's person or equipment much more likely. It's clear that the Dallas patient was quite ill, read messy, when he was transported, and I don't entirely disagree with them downing the rig and crew until they could be certain that they weren't creating a giant community-wide fomite in the form of a 9/11 ambulance and crew. As the threat of Ebola importation becomes much more of a reality, EMS agencies are forming plans to preempt a recurrence of the Dallas situation. See the links from both of these organizations of which I am a part. And he gives 2 links. And on the second one, he gives the specific information of how to find how to handle Ebola virus cases for ambulance, EMS crews, and so on. Regarding the closure of borders to prevent spread to other third world nations across the globe, I can say that there doesn't seem to be much direct travel among non-adjacent third world countries, such as via airlines. Rather, it seems more to be the case that travel regarding affected countries would be A, among adjacent countries regardless of economic status, B, from the third to the first world, C, from the first world to the third world and back. As such, it doesn't seem like travel blackouts would be worth the damage they'd cause. Instead of spending money locking down borders and travel and developing expensive Department of Defense projects, we could be saving a lot of lives right now with relatively inexpensive IV fluids. The only problem is that we're actually in an IV saline shortage. Go figure, an American company actually having trouble delivering a salt-laden product to the masses. Also, I've recently seen an uptick of respiratory cases. EVD 68, maybe? It's hard to say when our air is so polluted that I'm certain it could be successfully shoveled, but it's good to keep in mind. Thanks for all the hard work you all put in, and congratulations on the sponsorship. P.S. If I was going to bet on the next non-seasonal outbreak, I'd say a corona or maybe something introduced from the domestic animal population, such as parvovirus or canine distemper. So
great. I was hoping an EMT person would chime in on this. Very good.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, the next one's from Mauricio. Dear Viral Gurus, I'm slowly catching up with the last 3 weeks of TWiV since I've not been commuting from Frederick to Bethesda in the past weeks. I have not listened to the latest, and now I am short by one episode up to date. I would like to have an input on some of the follow-ups on the Ebola virus epidemic, although it has been mentioned that before that there are some pseudo-doctors who go around saying that at some point Ebola virus will mutate to become airborne. I think that Hollywood is the main factor in producing such ideas. However, I think CDC, WHO, and Doctors Without Borders should all get together, give a press conference showing a unified front in which they explain not only the root of infection, but on how unlikely it is that a mutation could confer a complete change in the way this virus propagates. In fact, they should say the number of negative and positive RNA viruses that have changed their route of infection in a natural scenario, not in a gain-of-function experiment under well-controlled laboratory conditions. In fact, we'll not be surprised if somewhere someone has made a mathematical model in which they have calculated the probability for an RNA virus to have a mutation that would change its route of infection. Anyway, initial reason to send this email was to send a pick of the week. Latest Journal of Virology, an article by Ian Lipkin investigating mystery disease, tales from a viral detective. Interesting piece of work. I greatly enjoyed it. Cheers from Cloudy Frederick, 79 Fahrenheit, 50% chance of rain, 54% humidity, and 26 kilometer per hour winds. Mauricio is at the NCI. It's a cool article. It's about what you need to do virus detective work and all the obstacles you encounter, materials transfer agreements, this and that. And so it's very amusing.
Cool.
So, did we say it was by Ian Lipkin?
Yeah.
Can't remember. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Okay, Kathy.
All right, so this is from Heather. Is that where we are?
Yeah.
Yes. Hello, Doctors TWiV. First, I would like to say how much I appreciate the public service you are providing with your ongoing discussion of the Ebola outbreak. I would also like to convey my dismay at the constant vitriol that you are having to rebut. I think you are doing so admirably. Secondly, I would like to suggest a new segment for your podcast. This Week in Ebola, updates and follow-ups of no more than 25 minutes per show. Okay. We're already over an hour in.
Yeah.
Okay. Third, I heartily endorse the suggestion of a show about Lassa fever. If you would like more ideas about non-Ebola viruses that might be interesting, here are my suggestions. PAV1 in spiny lobsters. And then she suggests recruiting Dr. Behringer or Dr. Shields on that topic. Methods for detection and surveillance of viral VHS virus. Never mind. I don't know what VHS stands for. Scroll down for link to the paper.
Well, I think it's hemorrhagic septicemia.
Okay. Citrus tristiza virus or other important agricultural viruses that could have an effect on the economy and food supply, or a discussion of HPV. HPV is a very important virus that does not get nearly enough attention or discussion, in my opinion. Any, non-Ebola, virology topic you choose will be interesting, I'm sure. I've been enjoying the inclusion of plant ecology and insect virus topics as of late, and I really enjoyed your discussion with Jeff, the bioinformatician. If you could recruit a veterinary virologist as a TWiV guest, I think that would be fascinating. I'm looking forward to the next TWiV. Keep up the good work. Heather. P.S. Here's my humble pick if you are so inclined. And she gives a link to Diversity Journal Club. I didn't check that out.
It's a Twitter-based journal club.
Oh.
Based on issues surrounding science, technology, education, math. Is that STEM, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool.
Engineering.
Engineering.
Right. So diversity issues in those
STEM,
fields.
In the STEM fields. Yeah, so you can check it out every Friday, every other Friday.
So, and Heather's not the only one to suggest topics. We have a long list of topics that's in the listener email of topics that people have suggested.
And we should do an all-email episode sometime, too.
Bingo. We did have a veterinary virologist not too long ago, XJ Meng, right?
Right.
We talked about viruses of pigs and so forth. All right.
And we have TWiV 126, Warts Up Doc with Michelle Osborne that
HPV.
Heather may want to check back.
Robin writes, the plot thickens and links to the article about asymptomatic Ebola virus infections that we just talked about.
Yep.
Todd writes, they referred to a microbiologist from Columbia University, and I turned to see your name emblazoned on the screen during the program called The Cycle. Perhaps they didn't know the black and yellow trick for pronouncing your name. I've listened carefully all the times I've seen Tony Fauci after getting to know him through TWiV and have to shake my head at the media trying to force words into his mouth. He holds to his role as a sensible informer and never allows that to happen. Thanks for all your good work. Todd from Northern Colorado. The black and yellow trick. Racaniello, black and yellow.
Yep.
Very simple.
Yep.
My class a few years ago said, Professor Racaniello, we always think of you when we hear the song. Oh, gee, that's nice. All right, Kathy.
Okay.
Do you want me to read any of these?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, Are we skipping you?
You skip.
Go ahead.
I had an objection.
Did I skip you?
Cycles, but you skipped.
Okay, go ahead.
That's okay. I'll take Charles. Dear meteorologists, Ebola pundits, or was it virologists? With our 24-hour news cycle and sensationalist headlines, I thought you'd appreciate this not-so-subtle critique of the coverage of Ebola in the news, and links to Ebola. This is based on a screenshot from CNN that I also saw on Twitter, where CNN had the tag at the bottom of the screen, Ebola, the ISIS of biological agents.
Oh.
And then this humor piece on the New Yorker riffs on this. Is Ebola the ISIS of biological agents? Is Ebola the Boko Haram of AIDS? Is Ebola the Al-Shabaab of dengue fever? Yes, it goes on. Thanks as always for your wonderful podcast. I've just finished applying to vet schools, and you all have inspired me to pursue veterinary virology and the study of emerging infectious disease. And here in Minneapolis, it snowed this weekend on October 4th. Well, Charlie, after you get into veterinary virology, maybe we could have you on the show.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny thing there. All right, you want to do another one, Alan? Since
Sure, that was a short one, and I skipped. Jerry writes, wow, as a long-term listener of TWiV, I can empathize with your current situation. My own interest in virology sprang from personal interests, as mentioned in my previous letter, where I explained how Tom bought into the persuasive misinformation about HIV that had such terrible consequences. When I juxtapose his situation to the current one with Ebola, I find similarities. The problem here is that the belief that Ebola is a lie affected all of us. I cringed when I heard about the Liberians who stormed the treatment center to save the patients from MSF volunteers, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, who they believed made up Ebola as an elaborate ruse as a cover for their nefarious ulterior motives. I personally believe we lost control when that misguided mob took infectious people, virally saturated mattresses, and bloody blankets into the most densely populated and poorest region of Liberia, West Point. It's kind of sad because most people actually have good intentions. Trust is a very important, perhaps the most important key to reducing the transmission rate down below 1 to 1, so this outbreak abates. You guys have an important role in disseminating information. Everyone is going to look to TWiV for answers, reassurances, and knowledge that will help save their lives. Vince, I'm glad to hear that you expressed some concerns about the current policies related to air travel. I don't subscribe to the belief that quarantines or outright flight restrictions are a viable option, but I do feel the current mode of operation is fraught with problems. With all due respect, we're dealing with human beings. The previously mentioned mob situation in Liberia is a perfect example. We're not dealing with a virologist in a BSL-4 research lab, and I'm concerned that unpredictable behavior can precipitate unforeseen results. I can't allow myself to put so much faith in the American medical system, much less other countries. I feel like many of the opining authorities are a bit too cocky about our abilities. Maybe it's just a means to reduce panic. This virus is nothing like HCV. It kills in a month. In that time, it manages to infect 2 others. This takes HCV 10 years to accomplish the same. It affects the people we most need to help us, the doctors. In a perfect world, we can contain it, but statistics are hinting it is exploiting our weaknesses. I find myself researching various studies of adenosine analogs and small molecules I think may help to treat this nasty virus. Lists a few. I wonder, though, do you think these would be of use in humans? Do you think the reduction in viral load prior to the viral burden becoming insurmountable would allow the person to develop a natural immunity? My concern would be that a person may recover only to relapse. It appears to me that people can recover, so that tells me our bodies can fight it off. Perhaps all we need is a little help. If we can prevent the virus from overwhelming us quickly and save some of our strength to allow the immune system to do its thing, we might be able to attain a high level of survival. I also found an interesting story about a Liberian doc who gave his patients 3TC, the reverse transcriptase inhibitor used for HIV and hepatitis B. He claims only 2 of 17 patients died. I don't think this drug exhibited efficacy in vitro, but those are significant results, albeit small. Of course, a vaccine would be ideal, much cheaper, and timing would not be critical, but maybe these could buy us some time to prepare the vaccines. As far as preventing infections in hospitals and homes, I hope all the hospitals and institutions invest in those UV systems, ozone generators, and even gamma radiation chambers to disinfect irregular surfaces, clothes, and equipment. I'm sure the people running this show know what they're doing, at least I hope so. Thanks again to Vince, Kathy, Alan, and Dixon for all you do.
Don't forget lasers.
Lasers. Yes,
Right.
we should definitely use lasers.
I don't know if these compounds would work, but I'm concerned about monotherapy.
Yes.
Because you get resistance. I think we need more than one compound to treat patients.
And in the case of the claim of patients surviving, I mean, okay, so this doctor gave them 3TC. Did he also put them on IVs? Because that has a major impact on,
Yeah.
In response to the question about reducing virus load prior to the viral burden becoming insurmountable, I think is a viable overall good strategy.
Yeah.
If we could
Sure.
have the host immune system catch up,
Yeah.
then
right.
fine.
Problem is that, we're in an outbreak. It's hard to do research in an
Yes.
outbreak, right? So you're going to give people things. They may or may not work, and you never know why. So next one is from Sid, who writes, Hi, TWiV crew, graduate student in immunology at Washington University in St. Louis. Been listening since 2009. Great podcast. Helped foster my interest in virology and host virus interactions. Increased questions about airborne transmission of Ebola has made me identify a gap in my knowledge about the molecular basis of viral transmissibility. Well, you know what, Sid? It's a gap in everyone's knowledge.
Yes.
Specifically, I found that I was unable to describe a molecular argument for Ebola, why Ebola is unlikely to become airborne, other than invoking Vincent's argument that a virus has never evolved over this short period of time. In fact, I couldn't find any papers describing the general biophysical molecular requirements a virion must fulfill to be potentially airborne transmissible. Well, I know there are specific properties that tend to correlate with transmission modes, such as fecal-oral transmitted viruses generally lacking envelopes. I'm unaware of any similar correlation with airborne. Questions. 1. Given a virus, are there any molecular biophysical properties that can be measured in vitro that can indicate or at least highly suggest that a virus can be transmitted via the airborne route? No.
No.
2. Given a known airborne virus, are there any molecular biophysical properties that can be inferred about this virus without having to culture or sequence it? No. Thanks for your time, and I greatly appreciate the work you guys put in the podcast. I can only imagine the amount of panicked Ebola email you must receive. Temperature in St. Louis, 13C. Clear skies. Perfect to see the total lunar eclipse tonight.
Sid, you just arrived at the frontier.
Yeah.
This is why we need to work on this stuff. And
Yes.
Fouché and Kawaoka tried, and everybody freaked out.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have no idea about what's the determinant of transmissibility through the air. Absolutely none.
For any airborne virus. And Ebola is not an airborne virus, so we don't know what determines transmissibility through any route at the molecular level, really, right?
No, except as he said, even this fecal-oral transmission generally lacking envelopes. There are some viruses with envelopes that are transmitted that way. There's
Corona.
a tenteric corona, yeah. So no rules. And the problem is we don't have pairs of viruses that can or cannot transmit by a certain route.
Right.
You would need to generate those pairs by doing gain-of-function studies.
Oh, well, no, we can't do that. That's too dangerous. We might make a potentially pandemic pathogen, Alan.
Yes.
Okay. Should I read Fernando?
You got to keep us in line here, Kathy.
Yes,
Yep.
please.
Fernando writes, Hi, TWiV team. I just read 2 articles that deepen my understanding of what you all, and especially Alan, have been saying about the social causes of Ebola virus disease and what not to fear. And he gives 2 links. One is to the New Yorker, and one is to something called lifemagnanimous.com, tearing out the seams. And the New Yorker one is kind of a more factual storyline, and the Rebecca Schultz Life Magnanimous one about tearing out the seams is a particularly good one if you want to connect with real person stories about what's happening in the Ebola virus outbreak. Or the front page of today's New York Times has another one of those stories that was particularly a tearjerker for me. So
I just want to say, though, there's a sentence in this second article. It says, Ebola isn't ravaging West Africa because people are dirty or uneducated. It's precisely because people can care and love on a level we as Americans have lost touch with. I don't think you can say all Americans have lost touch with it. That's not fair. That's not fair. I understand what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
Alan, you are next.
Okay. So let's see. Where were we?
Sandra.
Sandra, here we go. Today here in Dallas, an Ebola patient died at a local hospital. There's been a bit of discussion at my office about Ebola, so I have come out of the closet as a nerd by telling people I listen to TWiV each week and sharing Ebola info from TWiV, particularly about the chances of a mutation making the virus transmissible by air. That seems to be a hot topic. This question from a coworker I could not answer. If someone touches an object, say a used tissue, which has body fluid from someone with Ebola, such as nasal discharge, can the person who touched it get Ebola?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If they then get that fluid into their fluids, in general, how long can the virus live on inorganic surfaces? I'm assuming here the nasal discharge contains transmissible virus, and realize that may be incorrect.
It does.
Yes,
it does.
It does. So
there was an article in the New York Times Science Tuesday that I saw just after I saw her email, and it suggests that 24 hours is considered fairly safe for surfaces. To me, that sounds like an abundance of caution.
Yes.
And of course, because it's that kind of article in the New York Times, the author doesn't cite a reference, so I couldn't check that.
Let me just jump in here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The article is written by, what's his name? Don McNeil, who I had a little argument with a year ago or so about the reservoir of MERS. So take it with that much salt, all right? Because Don McNeil wrote to me when I said you should fix this. He said, I'm a journalist, not a scientist. So I don't know why McNeil wrote this thing to begin with. You know, if you read it, it's going to drive you nuts because it's wandering all over the place and it's saying maybe, maybe not. So I asked Elke Muehlberger, how long can Ebola survive on surfaces? She wrote back, it seems that Ebola can survive for quite a while. There's one report about the decay of dried Ebola in complete darkness, and the virus was still viable after a couple of days. However, It is very sensitive to UV. It's stable for a couple of months when stored in media in the refrigerator. And she sent 3 papers, which I will link to. So a couple of days dried and in the dark. So in the dark is key because, if there's sunlight, the UV will inactivate it quickly. So
even fluorescent lighting has some UV in it.
Yeah. How about those newfangled squirrely, lights that we all get now? What are they called?
Full spectrum?
They're no longer incandescent.
Compact fluorescence?
Compact
fluorescence. Yeah, they're fluorescent lights.
They're fluorescent. And what about the LEDs now that cost so much money that last forever? Do they also emit UV?
I don't. Probably not as much.
Yeah.
LEDs in general tend to have a narrower emission spectrum. So I don't know what the commercial ones, they're going to have broad enough spectrum that they don't look weird, but
okay. So anyway, the reason I had a problem with this article is, can I get Ebola from public transportation if a passenger coughed in their hand, held the pole, and then you touched it? Can you get Ebola? And he says no. Because Ebola people are really sick and they're going to be in the hospital. So come on, Don McNeil. Go ahead, Kathy. I'm really sorry, but
no, that's fine. You did a better job of getting facts. I only found what I could find. So that's it. That's all. Or no,
right. Alan
is reading.
You right? Really don't want me reading letters today, do you, Vincent?
So
is it because we disagreed about the travel ban?
No. I'm sorry. I thought Kathy was reading too. Your voice just sounds very nice today, Alan.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Still from Sandra. Go ahead.
Okay, so yes, we're still on Sandra's letter. So regarding the man who died of Ebola here in a hospital yesterday, the body, or carcass as Dixon would call it, was cremated. Radio news this morning was that no decision has been made about how his ashes will be handled. Now that's some powerful fear. I hope they'll be given to his fiancée, mother of his child, if she wants them.
There's no problem with ashes, right?
And no, this is not. No, this does not survive cremation.
1,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's the virus is gone. All right, we still don't seem to have all the facts about what's happening at the hospital. The hospital has given conflicting accounts. All we know for sure is that he went to the ER feeling ill and was examined and sent home. Reportedly, he told a nurse he'd been in West Africa, but lied when he was asked about contact with any sick people there. Supposedly, the doctor who saw him was not aware he'd just been to West Africa. It was 2 days later, when he worsened and returned to that same ER, that he was admitted. On a more upbeat note, when his fiancée and her kids were quarantined in their small apartment, someone with the city or county found a person to lend a house for them to live in for a while, as the city and county supposedly have no budget to house people in a situation like this. Keeping the young kids inside all the time was making them all miserable, and the other residents in the very low-income complex were frightened. One of our county judges personally went to the apartment and drove the woman and her kids to the home that was loaned in an effort to calm fears about transmission. The judge did not wear any protective gear. I bet that Fox News hasn't carried that story.
Of course not.
3:45 p.m. here. It's 88 Fahrenheit, 44% humidity. Thus, it feels like 89. Yesterday, our high temp was 98, but no, most people in Texas don't believe in climate change.
Oh, man. So this judge did the right thing because the people are not symptomatic. It's not a problem,
They're
right?
not symptomatic. They're not infectious. They're quite probably not even infected. But yeah, this was the right thing to do, and I saw that in the news and said that's really that was a smart move, and that was a really just a good thing to do as a person, as a government official to do that.
I am determined to get through this follow-up.
Keep going. We'll just
Haley
keep going.
writes, greetings, TWiV. Here in Portland, Oregon, the weather at a balmy 75F 24C with clear blue skies is unseasonably warm enough for me to make an anecdotal observation about climate change. Thanks so much for your delightful podcast. I just recently took the advice of a professor who recommended them, and what a timely decision it was to start tuning in. I've been fascinating researching the experimental treatments for Ebola that have recently been implemented to save patients ailing in the U.S., and I was particularly puzzled at why brincidofovir was chosen after the exhaustion of ZMapp. From what I understand, which is admittedly little, brincidofovir is used to treat viruses with DNA genomes like herpes, adeno, and cytomegalovirus. Can one assume that just because a drug is successful at inhibiting a DNA polymerase, it must also be effective at inhibiting an RNA polymerase? Is there an assumption that RNA polymerases are in general more error-prone than DNA polymerases, and thus if cytomegalo and adeno were tricked, then Zaire Ebola must be tricked as well? I also wondered whether the bulky conjugated lipid part of brincidofovir, even though it aids penetration of cell membranes, might lead to a narrowing of the range of polymerases that might accept it. Lastly, I wonder if it could even be a potentially harmful treatment for a patient suffering from a disease that affects blood vessels, because its close cousin cidofovir, the analog without the lipid, is known to suppress basic fibroblast growth factor. Thanks for possibly entertaining my speculation, and keep up the wonderful podcast. So, just so happens, Haley, that yesterday I was researching this, and the lipid is cut off when it gets into the cell, making cidofovir out of brincidofovir. Okay. Apparently, the company Chimerix, who makes this, at the beginning of the year, at the onset of the Ebola outbreak, handed its collection of compounds to the U.S., including cidofovir and brincidofovir, which had been through clinical trials phase 1 and 2, and said, here, just see if they inhibit Ebola. No reason to think it would. I look at the compounds, this thing is a cytidine analog, and where there was a ribose ring, there's now a few carbons and a bunch of hydroxyls. So as you know, hydroxyls are needed for chain extension by the polymerase. So I wouldn't predict that it would inhibit either DNA or RNA polymerase, but it's known to inhibit DNA. They just tried it, and guess what? In cells in culture, it inhibits Ebola virus replication. So since it had been through phase 2, they said, let's try it. Of course, the Dallas fellow who got it died, so we don't know if it would ever have helped him. I worry about its toxicity, too, because maybe in an Ebola patient where different things are happening than in a smallpox or a adeno or cytomegalovirus infected patient, maybe it would be a problem. So, there you go.
Yeah.
Kathy, you're next.
Okay, Molly writes, I absolutely love TWiV. It is the most interesting and inspiring podcast. Quick question on Ebola. I know you're sick of it. Sorry. Was it necessary for officials to kill the Spanish nurse's dog? Maybe you mentioned this already and I missed it, but are dogs a very likely carrier? Can they be infected, or is this just another example of scare tactics? Thank you. It is a chilling 38 degrees at 5:30 a.m. in Wyoming, USA. Just prepping for the coming winter with some snow and lots of wind. Molly. And we have talked about this before. There's evidence.
About dogs.
Yeah, Ebola replicates in dogs. And so there's evidence of seropositive dogs correlating with outbreaks, and a couple of references that we've
But
talked about.
I don't think they should have killed the dog.
What do you want them to do with it?
Quarantine it.
I think they didn't want to bother, honestly.
That's just not nice.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine it's tough to quarantine a dog because you got to feed it and clean up after it, right? So maybe they didn't want to bother. They said, we don't have the facilities to do it. I agree. They should have been quarantined. I don't know if the nurse had any say in it, but she's probably quite ill, right?
Yeah.
But that's why they did it. I don't know if it was necessary, but these dogs are running around Africa after outbreaks, and nobody quarantines them.
Nobody's
right?
catching it from them.
Yeah,
I mean, every outbreak has been traceable to an individual who probably had a specific exposure, and it wasn't from all the dogs running around in the streets.
These dogs are seropositive, but I don't know if anyone.
That doesn't mean they're Ebola positive.
Yeah, so they may not even shed. I just don't. They don't get sick apparently. So this is a thing worth following up. So dogs and pigs are apparently susceptible. All right. Who's next? I forgot.
I think
Alan?
I'm next.
Alan.
Jim writes, Dear TWivers, thanks for spending so much time on answering Ebola questions. I have two more. I was recently reading an article about when Ebola first appeared in Africa in the mid-1970s, and the article indicated there were two unrelated outbreaks of the virus, different strains at the same time. This has happened again in the current outbreak, i.e. West Africa and Democratic Republic of Congo. Is this just a coincidence, or is there some environmental factor involved?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
So there's a theory that in bats, which are likely the reservoir, there's a very low prevalence of virus, 1 to 3%, something like that, in bat populations. And the idea is that there are periodically there is increased replication in the population, and this may coincide with human outbreaks because that's not enough really to spill over so readily. So the idea would be that if that's true, then yeah, you could have multiple outbreaks at once.
Yeah.
But they're different strains, right?
Yes.
In both these cases.
Yeah.
But there may be some common environmental factor that makes it, Ebola season for bats across an entire latitude or something.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Two, with the new infection in Spain, they quickly euthanized one of the quarantine nurse's pet dog. This seems like a missed opportunity to see if the dog became a victim of the virus. Yeah. My bigger question is, once the West African outbreak is finally brought under control, is it likely there will be new animal reservoirs for the virus? Dogs come to mind because there must be a lot of them whose masters have died going hungry, and many of the human victims are buried in shallow graves or sometimes not at all. In addition to dogs, there are many wild animals that will eat carrion, and the recently dead humans can still harbor the virus. Thanks again for your contributions in answering questions about this deadly outbreak. And Jim says 14 Celsius with partial clouds in Vancouver.
Yeah, these are good questions, but right now I think they're just trying to get this outbreak under control.
Yeah.
And not check animals, right?
And I'm not too worried about the dogs. That does not seem to have been an issue in the past, and there's no clear reason to believe that it's an issue now.
So, they're not doing very much case tracking anymore, and so whether or not dogs are a risk factor, we're not going to know, I think.
Yeah.
Next one's from Gail. Dear TWiV stars. Good. Oh. Another Ebola question, and she talks about the dogs, the Spanish dog, and this brought several questions to mind. If there is likely to be increasing risk of people carrying Ebola into developed countries, is there a political need to investigate the potential for pets to transmit Ebola? Yeah, I think so. I think we should, but as I said, we're not going to do it under the current conditions because we have to worry about the people first. But I think at some point you'll see some studies about dogs and other animals coming out. As a vet, I would take a pragmatic approach in that euthanasia is not a welfare issue in itself. Vegetarians may have other views, but surely the threat of having one's beloved pet euthanized unnecessarily is not conducive to people following protocol. How far does this go? Do you euthanize the pets of in contacts or pets the sufferer has had contact with but does not live with? Not sure how I would feel if I were in this situation, and perhaps other concerns would be more pressing. So those are good points, absolutely.
Yeah.
More questions. 1, if I had Ebola and my husband and dog had been exposed and my husband is isolated at home, why can my dog not be isolated with him?
Yeah.
I don't see why not, right?
Right.
2, what happens to the bodily waste of people exposed to Ebola who are in isolation? Bagged and autoclaved.
Yep.
3, if there's no more information on transmission by pets, would this be likely to be something that might be seen as worth studying in a BSL-4? Yep, absolutely. I'm not saying in any way that I believe putting people at further risk is outweighed by animal or pet owner rights, but if this outbreak is predicted to carry on for a long time, perhaps it would be safe to investigate the risks rather than risking people moving their dogs before reporting their suspected Ebola. Thanks for the long email. Thank you for Twix. Keep up the good work. I'm totally in support of the fact-checking thing as long as you know a good source. There's nothing wrong with checking your facts. Thank you, Gail.
So just a counter-argument to having the dog be with the infected person or potentially infected person who's being isolated. We don't know the incubation time in dogs, and by the time we would bring the person out, could we bring the dog out? That might be a question. And also, at least for the WHO Pocket Guide for Clinical Management of Patients with Viral Hemorrhagic Fever, they mention 2 things about waste. Remove any solid matter on soiled linen and flush down a toilet. And waste such as feces, urine, and vomit and liquid waste from washing can be disposed of in the sanitary sewer or pit latrine. No further treatment is necessary.
Okay. So
I was a little surprised by that, but
Well,
yeah.
I don't think I'd expect this virus to survive any kind of sewage treatment.
Right.
Well, it depends where, right?
Yes.
It does. But they do point out a pit latrine would be okay, presumably because it's going to remain contained there, and that'll be that.
I think here in the U.S., Ebola waste is going to be autoclaved.
Of course it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Whose turn is it?
Maybe mine.
It is yours. You could sort of paraphrase if you want.
Okay. Thomas writes, I'm listening to your latest podcast, number 305, and you just said that no patient with Ebola has died if treated in the USA. And he's listening
Yes.
at the same time that the Dallas patient died.
That information was out of date.
Right. So he had previously emailed and warned us about drawing any conclusions from too small a data sample. Continue to say that Ebola is still being seen by the professionals through rose-colored glasses because they are driven by the desire to stop people from overreacting. And then he said, I also just read of a recovered Ebola victim that infected his sexual partner apparently through semen. I don't know where he saw that because I couldn't find it.
I bet that's the Marburg case you talked about.
I suspect it might be the Marburg case, which is a case of 1 from 1968.
Of a different virus.
Of a different virus. Sorry, but from what I know of Africa and its myriad of cultures, I would be very cautious about thinking recovered victims would cease having sex for any extended period of time. We've talked about that. Okay, and then he talks about his photographs. He said, I think it's a bit cynical on your part to dismiss the recent New York Times photo coverage series on Ebola that I referenced as merely being sensationalism. So, okay. Several European and African countries have instituted quarantines, and as far as I know, they haven't had any cases of Ebola. I don't know of any European or African countries that have instituted quarantines, so I don't know where he got that news. There's some isolation of people surrounding the Spanish nurse, so that would be the European situation, and isolation in African countries where the outbreak is ongoing. Ebola is so frightening to most people because of the horrid symptoms accompanying this disease. Bleeding from every orifice doesn't sound like anything most people want to deal with. Just because you are spending so much time covering this disease speaks for itself. I am listening to what you say. I'm not totally convinced with your responses yet, but I'm getting there regarding Ebola being so thoroughly researched. You reply regarding the mosquito and HIV transmission question I raised. Your reply was completely convincing. Thank you. This is exactly why I raised these questions or email you my suspicions. Anyway, I do appreciate that you provide a platform for listeners like myself. I will continue to avail myself of your repository of knowledge. I suggest you look at the following URL. I don't want to be on any plane that recently visited any African country where Ebola is rampant. The following is just why suggest a quarantine be put in effect until Ebola is under control in Africa. And I didn't look at this story. I'm not sure what.
Airport workers ill-equipped to cope with sick flyers.
Okay.
My respect for your podcast keeps me listening and asking questions and making insinuations, which you, in almost all cases, answer resolved to my satisfaction. Truth, like virginity, isn't readily reparable once violated. No wonder people don't trust most government sources. Academic institutions of the sort you and your team work for are far more likely to believe than any government source, including the CDC. I appreciate your keeping it that way. I
All right.
don't know if that's the majority of people not trusting government sources or trusting academics better than governments.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know about that. So
I
okay.
feel that scientists in general are very trusted these days, right? We're trying to change that.
Mm-hmm.
We made it through the follow-up.
Really?
Excellent.
That's it. Yeah, I have an article here about fever checks.
Fever checks.
And we'll put that link in the show notes. That's done. We talked about that. So we can move on to picks of the week. Alan, what do you have for us?
I have a book, which I just recently finished reading, called The Sixth Extinction. This is by Elizabeth Colbert, who's a science writer who's done a couple of other books. And this is a book about the mass extinction that is going on right now. So there have been 6 mass extinctions that geologists and biologists track throughout the fossil record. 5 until now. And, everybody thinks about the extinction event after the dinosaurs. There was actually a bigger one sometime before that, the Permian-Triassic extinction, which was also called the Great Dying. And Colbert goes through some of the history behind how the concept of extinction got into biology and how we came to realize that these things do actually happen in sporadic periods. And then talks about profiles by going through profiles of several species that have either gone extinct or are going extinct. Weaves that into how humans are now causing another one of these events ourselves. And it's not nearly as much of a downer as it sounds like. It's actually a really. I picked it up thinking, okay, this is going to be but it's actually a really entertaining and really interesting book that cool. I thoroughly enjoyed.
Cool.
All right. So the current extinction we're doing, right?
Yes.
And this includes the coral reefs, right?
Yeah, she has a chapter on the coral reefs, which ties into the ocean acidification, CO2 level issues. She actually starts off with a chapter about the woolly mammoth, which we think of as a species that went extinct because it was adapted to the environment of the glaciers and the ice ages, and then the environment changed, and that's the traditional story behind it. But it increasingly looks like the reason that it went extinct was probably more related to hunting.
Yeah.
Because the timing of the extinction, it was very broadly distributed, but you only see the mammoths going extinct from the remaining record at the time that humans moved into the area.
Right. Neat.
Pretty incriminating. So yeah, it's a bunch of fascinating stories.
Great.
Kathy, what do you have?
So I picked Seeing the Invisible, which is a New York Times Biointeractive, which is an HHMI organization. Somebody's picked the HHMI Biointeractive site before. This one is about Leeuwenhoek and has incredible animations, pictures about things about microscopy. It's all paper cutout animations,
yes.
Just really well done. And I thought it was very timely relative to the Nobel Prize this week for the high-resolution live cell microscopy, also known as nanoscopy. And I got this link from Isabel, so I wanted to give her a shout-out for that. So check it out.
This is really, really very well-done video.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. My pick is the winner of the 2014 Scientific American Science and Action Award at the Google Science Fair. His name is Kenneth Shinozuka, and it's a very short video which shows a little bit about him and how he designed a sensor to detect when his elderly grandfather, who had advanced disease, got up in the middle of the night and just walked around, and his family didn't know he was going off and he would get lost. So he built a sensor, which he built himself, which he put on his grandfather's foot. And whenever he got out of bed, it sent a signal to his daughter's iPhones, and she would wake up and say, "Hey, Pop, get back into bed." Really cool.
Oh, that's really, really cool.
And this kid, he designed it. He put it together. You see him soldering, and he wrote the software. And I think this is really cool. And now he wants to work in some way to help elderly people because this was so rewarding. So it's very short. It's really cool. I really like it.
Very good.
We had a couple of listener picks. One more from our friend Johnny, the pediatrician in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you for the continued presentation in defense of reason and knowledge in the face of fear and headline misinformation about Ebolavirus disease. If not already a recent pick, public school educators in particular may appreciate Flu Attack, how a virus invades your body. The site the kids should see this was a previous pick that continues to amaze, delight, and inform. This is a video, right, about flu replication, which we've mentioned a long time ago, but it's never bad to make multiple picks of one thing, so that's fine. Also, I'd like to bring to Alan Dove's attention especially the fact that Robert Krulwich's blog, Krulwich Wonders, on NPR's website, ended at the end of September. A loss. A video and a last post, Everything Dies, right, was interesting. May cool, informed heads and minds prevail, Johnny. Thank you, Johnny, and thank the others for their listener picks of the week. And don't forget, this episode is brought to you by the Department of Microbiology at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, department full of virologists. If you're interested in doing a PhD or a postdoc in a virology lab, definitely check it out for graduate students, potential graduate students want to apply to their PhD program. Deadline is December 1st, mssm.edu/MIC. This episode of TWiV and all the others can be found free of charge at twiv.tv, also on iTunes. And we do love getting your questions and comments, even about Ebola. We're not tired of it. Everyone is new in learning. Please send them to TWiV at twiv.tv. We'll keep answering them until you don't send them anymore. Alan Dove is at turbidplaque.com. You can also find him on Twitter. Thank you very much, Alan.
Always a pleasure.
And Kathy Spindler is at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks. This is good, and I learned a lot.
I do as well.
Always.
Some of the questions the dogs seem to have spurred a lot of questions, which is not surprising. People love dogs, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But really, we don't mind Ebola. We don't mind anything else. We do have a lot of others. We'll get to them. We promise.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.